Hello everybody, it's Graham Morrison here from Scotland. Um, it's been about 2 years, I believe, since I made a video for chessvideos.tv. My apologies on that. Been pretty busy chess-wise, played quite a lot of chess, and in that last 2 years I've managed to achieve 3 international master norms. Not quite there yet in terms of the IM title, because I need to also cross the 2,400 barrier in FIDE rating, but I'm optimistic. I'll be making some videos for you in the weeks ahead, based on the last 3 years or 2 years practice. Game I want to show you today is a game I played about 2 months ago in the European Team Championships in Greece. I had a good result. I got my third final IM norm there. I wouldn't say I played so well. I was very much taking a pragmatic perspective, focusing on good clock handling and playing rapidly because of the FIDE time control. It meant that I got quite a few dodgy positions, but generally speaking, I was quite well prepared to deal with them practically. So, hence the quite good result, but probably lower quality games than in my previous IM norms. The game that I'm going to show you is from round 1 of that event. It's versus Grandmaster Ivan Saric of Croatia. A very, very strong Grandmaster indeed, 2648 ELO rating, and it very much formed a template for the sort of experiences I was referring to earlier in terms of reasonably pragmatic play by myself. Not such a great position, but I managed to cope quite well with it, and indeed in this game I came close to winning against such an illustrious opponent. Okay, less of the chatter and on with the chess. I was black, played favourite Sicilian defence, e6, d4, c6, d4, knight takes d4, knight c6. Now this is my preferred way these days of going into the Scheveningen Sicilian. I could do it the more traditional move order, like knight f6, blah blah blah, knight c3, d6. Then there's always a worry about the Keres attack, g4. I say it's a worry, it's just a matter of taste really, because I have a very good score as black in these Keres types positions. But practically, I know that a lot of people like playing it as white, and practically I don't see why I should go into the sort of positions that they quite like, if you see what I mean. So knight c6, it's my preferred option, but it does have its drawbacks. In particular, you've got to be prepared for white going into Taimanov Sicilian by playing knight b5 and either playing c4 or bishop f4. So that's 2 alternative ways that white has to play it. Anyway, my opponent played knight c3, d6. When I was preparing for the game that morning, I actually found it quite difficult to predict what system my opponent would play against my knight c6 and d6 system, because I couldn't find any games where he'd played against it. My best guess would that he'd play an English attack, bishop e3, knight f6, f3. He didn't play that, of course, as you'll see, but that was the system based on his other games that I thought was closest to his style and his tastes. He actually played move g4, which is playing the Keres attack, regardless of the fact that black hasn't put his knight in f6. I've played against this several times before. By and large, I've played either h6 or a6 in this position. I played h6 once against Grandmaster Paul Matwani of Scotland, and I was playing it based on the fact that I was quite impressed by a game that Kasparov played against Karpov in one of the World Championship matches, in which Kasparov got a very good game really quite easily. Paul Matwani played it a lot more challengingly, I think. He played a bishop e3 and an f4 type system, really very ambitious, going for space, and basically trying to blow black off the board, essentially. I played move g5 here, which the American Grandmaster Fedorovich didn't like in his annotations of the game. I'm still not sure. It is quite risky, but it goes to try to get the e5 square for black's knight, as you'll see in the game. The game went as follows. As you can see, black is really trying to put a clamper on e5, and we got a position like this, where I perhaps didn't play it too well round about here. I think I had a reasonable position, but then round about here it was quite clear that things had gone wrong. White's got g6 coming, and black's king's in a bit of a mess. So that was part of my experience with h6. In today's game, I played a6, which is a bit more flexible. Black wants to play the move knight e7 without being annoyed by a knight b5 idea. So a6 is a natural way of preparing that. White played bishop e3 and black played knight e7. Now this is a very typical sort of idea, very much borrowed from the Taimanov Sicilian. The idea is to play knight takes d4 and then knight c6 in order to get developed and ease the cramp. But you can also see here that it illustrates the advantage of black not having played knight f6 and gone into a normal Keres attack, and that the knight can to a certain extent bypass the g-pawn by playing knight e7 and either knight to c6 or knight to g6, and hope that the g-pawn, white's Keres attack or pseudo Keres attack, actually looks a little bit silly. Anyway, white played knight b3. Once before I had this position where white played bishop g2. That was Grandmaster Stuart Conquest, and that was in the European Team Championships in 2007, so a little over 4 years ago. And there black got a very easy position by taking off and playing knight c6, knight e5, queen c7, etc. And in fact, white hadn't played it so great, so because after h5 black probably stands even slightly better. So that's quite a good illustration of how black can actually unravel a bit and bring out the usual Sicilian type counterplay. I had a very good position against Stuart in that game, but it ended up as a draw. Anyway, in this game, white avoided the exchange very sensibly. Black played b5, f4, bishop b7. Now this is quite a well-known position. One very famous game, I'll only show the start of it, that really did wonders for the popularity of this system, was a game that Judith Polgar won as black against Alexei Shirov. Shirov played queen f3, which isn't so great in this position because of the move g5, which is the sort of move that I played against Paul Matwani in that game I showed a few minutes ago. The idea is very much to grab the e5 square for the knight and chase white's queen in the meantime. The way the game went was fg5, knight e5, queen g2, b4, knight e2, and then h5, which was, you know, quite an aggressive move. And I guess even more aggressive, white took an h5 and black played knight f5, very much taking advantage of this pin down to the queen. Bishop f2, queen takes g5, now taking advantage of the fact that queen takes queen, knight f3 check. And the dynamics continued with things like this. And eventually Shirov got crushed in 29 moves. But suffice it to say, black's got a terrific position here. He's got a massive attack. Obviously, queen takes queen. It's met by knight f3 with a lovely mate. And bishop takes e3, queen takes e3, knight f3 check, and queen d2 mates threatened. So, white's basically getting crushed here. Good example of black's play. Good example of how not to play as white as well. Queen d2 is what my opponent played. Mr. Saric in this game, much more sensible. White actually has many moves there. Queen e2, bishop g2, rook g1 have all been played. Queen d2 looks very logical. Now I played knight a5, and this is once again very standard approach for black in these systems. Bringing the knights out in a coordinated fashion. If black's allowed, he'll play some combination of knight e to c6 and maybe knight c4 at some stage, and in the meantime is quite happy for pieces to be exchanged, because it eases the cramp a little bit. White played knight takes a5. It's not obligatory. There was a game in Scotland a couple of years ago between FIDE master Alan Tate, very strong player. He's already got some 4IM norms. One of them actually is a Grandmaster norm. A game he played against Grandmaster Kete Arakame Grant in Edinburgh. Alan played rook g1 instead of knight takes a5. Very complex game. But knight takes a5 is a more standard move. And then my opponent played queen f2, and it was quite obvious to me now that he had actually done some preparations, even though I'm a pretty weak player compared to Grandmaster Saric's standard. He had actually quite quickly gone into a line that I had played against Grandmaster Luke McShane a couple of years ago. Against McShane, in order to cope with the perhaps threat bishop b6, I played the move knight c8, but it isn't really a great move. It does have its advantages in terms of black perhaps exchanging off pieces, something like this. But on the negative side, the knight in c8 really bottles in black's rook. And the whole queen side is very slow to activate. And in the meantime, black's king is relatively naked in the king side. And that's what actually happened in my game against McShane. He built up very simply in the king side and crushed me in 23 moves. Not very pleasant. Luckily, I'd actually had a look at that game and devised an improvement. I played the move rook c8. It's not the only move. Some other players have played the move queen c7. I believe Grandmaster Morrison has played that, yes, in a game against Kurnasov, which is not bad, but I quite liked rook c8, the move that I devised in analysis, because it was very much putting the challenge to white. Lots of threats of rook takes c3, exchange sacrifices in various positions, if black gets the timing right. My opponent has started to have a decent think here and played bishop d3. It's tempting to play rook takes c3, but it's way too early. The trouble being that white just plays bishop d2, and black doesn't really get too much for the exchange. It's not nothing, but it's not exactly what black was trying to get when he played such things. For example, bishop takes e4. Bishop takes e4, queen a4, something like bishop d3 looks good for white to me, or d5, perhaps with the idea of bishop takes c3, b4, but white can ignore it perhaps play queen a7. It really doesn't look very good. Instead, I played the move d5, which very thematic. D5 is a move that you always look to play in the Sicilian if you can. Here it puts pressure on e4. It tries to open up a diagonal for black's bishop. e4 is a bit weak, and it still keeps up black's options open about perhaps playing rook takes c3 someday. White played castles, which I don't really like too much. I think maybe something like bishop b6 and castles queenside might be better. Now white's threatening a6, or white maybe threatening a6, a3 rather. The black's queen can go back to d6, sort of. But rook takes c3 takes something like this. Looks like an interesting, unclear position. Something like that, I think, is the way that we should play it. Castles, on the other hand, well, I couldn't see any reason why I shouldn't take c3. And actually, during the game, in the spirit of pragmatism that I was mentioning earlier, I only thought about it for a minute or so. If you've played the Sicilian defence for any amount of time, you realise that when you get such a chance to play such a move, you basically have to do it. It's so thematic. You wreck white's queenside, and you get a little bit of material, and you get lots of long-term play. So in many ways, it doesn't really feel like a sacrifice at all. White played bishop b6, which I think is quite a good move, because it forces black's queen to not such a great square on a4, as we'll see later, but still not totally bad. Now, when you look at this position, black's exchange down, but he's got a pawn. White's queenside's a complete mess, and black really has quite nice pieces. The knight is just about to come to d5. So I was really quite pleased with the way that the game had gone up to now. On the other hand, my opponent in this position had a really quite huge thing. It was at least 30 minutes, and I couldn't really understand that at the time, because it seemed to me that it was really, apart from perhaps the move queen g2, which is perhaps playable, about the only move that he could play. I just wonder whether it was a bit psychological, in that he was perhaps coming to grasp by the fact that he had a not very good position against a not very good player like me. But anyway, it just doesn't seem to me that it's a sensible, practical measure to spend over 30 minutes on this position as white. His time, so he played bishop e2, knight d5. Once again, my opponent had another big think and played a move which I'm not sure is best. Perhaps bishop d4 is the best move. I think perhaps e3 is a good reply, and something like the position here. I would prefer black, but it's not totally clear. My opponent played rook d1, and I played bishop e7, although bishop d6 is a good alternative move. And I was very pleased with the position that I'd got here. I must say, I could see that I was going to castle, and I could see that I was having lots and lots of play on the centre and queenside, and my opponent had no real attack to speak of. Once again, he had a very long think, and eventually played the move bishop c5. which was one of the moves that I had certainly expected. That, along with perhaps things like Queen d4. Okay, so I'd sort of expected Bishop c5, and I had intended to play e3 as the response to that. And e3 is indeed a very good move. Let's have a look at it. So e3, bishop takes e3. First thing to notice is that the very tempting move Queen e4 doesn't quite work, unfortunately. It looks great because there's things on a diagonal and hitting e3, but unfortunately bishop f3 takes advantage of the fact that black's bishop in b7 is loose, and it's not too terrific, because the position that you get here, if anything, is slightly better for white, because black's queen side is a bit loose. But having said that, it's probably quite drawish. But that's not the real thing. After bishop takes e3, I think I've got two good moves. I think knight takes e3 is a good move, and followed up by something like queen a3, which threatens bishop c5. And you can see that white's queen and king are not in the greatest of places. Not disaster for white. I think it leads to a bit of an advantage to black. The other good move is something like knight takes c3, and that had been my intention when I was considering e3. Once again, something like rook here, takes na2. I thought that black had a splendid position. Got lots of material for the exchange, got lots of play for the exchange. Nothing really to worry about. Good position for black. Now, that's what a sensible game should have played. However, I suddenly had a clever thought. As I was sitting here, after deciding to play e3, but perusing round to see whether there was anything better, the idea of knight takes f4 occurred to me, and it seemed to me like a tremendous shot that won instantly, and I was sure that my opponent had missed it. Now, unforgivably, I decided to play it quite quickly, since he was in quite a lot of time trouble here. But it's yet another example of playing a blunder and your opponent's time trouble. It's just unforgivable. I should have, having decided to play the move, of course I should have checked whether he had any strong replies, rather than just giving it a cursory check. But I played knight takes f4 anyway. Now, no sooner had my hand left the piece, ringing through my mind was the old adage, checks and forcing moves. What do I mean by that? Is that check to see if your opponent has got any checks in reply, or captures, or strong threats that could derail your plans. And it was then that I saw his killing reply. He didn't think long about it, so maybe he hadn't missed knight takes f4 because he's such a strong player. Just thought about it for a minute or two and played the move rook d8 check. Ugh. And I'm afraid that's a killer. The idea is obvious. If I take with the bishop, his bishop in c5 is no longer en prise, and he can take the knight in f4. And if I take with the king, then he can then take my bishop in e7 with check. And once again, my knight in f4 is en prise. And in both situations, my king is naked and stuck in the middle. I don't think either is better than the two replies, bishop takes d8 and king takes d8, are both equally bad. I played bishop takes d8. It seemed to me to be a bit more practical. But now after queen takes f4, you can see what I mean. My king's in the centre. It can't get out of the centre. Can't castle. And in the meantime, he's got moves like queen d6, or queen b8, or rook d1, in order to kill me. The position's actually now quite lost, but white has to be very exact in order to win it. I played the move f6, with dreams of perhaps king f7 and trying to run away, something like that. Now, obviously things have gone wrong, but the one thing that now worked in my favour was the fact that my opponent had spent so much time getting to this position. I'll remind you of the theory of time control. You get 90 minutes for the whole game, and you get 30 seconds increment for each move that you play. But it means that you can get into time trouble really quite quickly, and he did, especially because I had been quite practical with my time playing. My opponent played rook d1, and that move throws away the win. What he should do is queen d6, which threatens mate in 2 with queen takes e6 check. And if I play bishop d5, he plays rook d1, which threatens rook takes d5. And then if I play queen takes a2 to defend the bishop on d5, he then plays c4, and it's all over. B takes c4, rook takes d5, and black resigns. So that would have been the logical conclusion to the game. He missed that, and he played it in the wrong order. Played rook d1 with very similar ideas. So for example, if I play bishop d5, he can play rook takes d5, and then I get mated. There's no defence to queen e6 check, and in fact if I try to run away with my king, like so, unfortunately I get mated here as well. That's a pity. But what he's now given me a chance to do, I mentioned earlier that my queen had gone out of play on a4, but now by sacrificing a little material, black can now take the opportunity to get this queen back in the game. And now with queen d6 and queen c7, and all of a sudden black is miraculously holding. In fact, if white is too ambitious, like for example bishop b6, black has got the magic move bishop c8, which is even clearly better for black. So white's got to be careful. Probably the best after this move is something like bishop b4, queen takes e4, king f7, and it's an equalish position. Black's no longer in terrible trouble, but probably neither is white. Now my opponent didn't play that. He played g5, which is a more aggressive move. Very much trying to now angle for some sort of g takes f6, bishop h5, mate type thing with the two bishops. Doesn't quite get there, but almost does. Queen c7, takes, g takes f6, and now of course I cannot play g takes f6, double question mark, because Bishop h5 is unfortunately mate. But, of course, bishop d5 is the move. Making way for d7 for my king. Unfortunately gives away the pawn on g7. And we get this sort of position. Now I've escaped far and away the worst of it. And I expected white to play bishop f8, angling for bishop f7. I wasn't terribly worried about it because I was convinced that black was doing okay in this sort of a position. Well, once again, I'm the exchange down, but I've got a pawn for it, and the weakness of his queen side is it's dreadful. So black, I don't believe, should be in any danger of losing this. He didn't do that. He played bishop d4, which was a little bit of a surprise, and possibly I let him off the hook a little bit, since I played a move which allows him an immediate draw. Possibly the best move is king e7, stopping bishop f7, and then something like this, and then playing bishop h6 subsequently, and picking up the pawn on g7. And black's probably a little bit better, I would say. Though it must be said, after this sort of thing, it probably is quite drawish again. I played e5, which seemed the most straightforward move, and he played the best move, which is bishop takes e5, and now it should just be a straightforward draw. Rook takes d5 check, and then he played bishop f7 check, and rook takes e5. So now when you look at it, it's rook and 4 pawns versus rook and 4 pawns. As always with rook endings, one of the key things is to get your rook as active as possible. By the way, it's a good time to mention it. One of my favourite rules of thumb for endings, I can't remember where I read it. I think it was perhaps in one of Jakob Egard's books. It's the idea that you should always activate your most valuable piece, and hence, and if you, for example, give the king a value of 4, that tends to show that in a king and rook ending, the rook's more valuable than the king, so you activate your rook first. But in perhaps a king and knight ending, it'd be more important to activate your king first. So rule of thumb can, obviously, there's lots of counter examples, but it's quite a good rule of thumb. So here, I should probably be more concerned about activating my rook first before my king, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to activate my king as well. But anyway, rook c8, activating the rook, didn't matter that I was leaving his g-pawn on board, and in fact I quite liked the idea of white diverting some attention to try to preserve that pawn at the cost of his own rook's activity. And in fact, white shouldn't have done that. The simplest thing that white should do now is rook takes e4, and then get rid of the queenside pawns, and this sort of position is quite clearly as drawn position as you can possibly imagine. Once again, the fact that he didn't have that much time was in my favour. So he played rook g5, and I played king g8. I was obviously getting a bit more optimistic now, because now his rook is the passive one and mine is more active, and what's more, my rook has lots of things that it can perhaps gobble up. You can quite imagine rook c4 to a4 to a2 happening soon, and that's indeed what happened. Rook g3, rook c4, he activated his king, and we got this sort of position here. I won't comment too much on these moves. There are alternatives, but I've analysed them, and as far as I see, they don't make a lot of difference. But we got to this position, and it's now moved 40, and I had still a bit of time left, though he was playing quite quickly, but he's made his 40th move, so it's out of time trouble. But I had probably, I'm trying to remember, maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes, which I should have used. Unfortunately, I played a quick move. The best move here was pointed out by a Scottish player called Clement Shreves on the Chess Scotland forum, who suggested Rook c5, which is absolutely the correct move. The key point being that it puts white in the quandary of having to defend the h-pawn or the g-pawn, because he can't do both with his own rook. It probably doesn't win, but it certainly does cause white quite a few problems. The best line that I've found for white is something like rook d2, takes, check, check. Now, it looks like things are going great for black, and that he's now 2 pawns up. But the problem is that, first of all, his king is terrible. It's pinned in the back rank. And secondly, the pawns themselves, the h and the a pawn, are very, very vulnerable. I don't actually think it's a win. And I'll give you some sample lines. For example, rook a7, I think is perhaps white's best move. Rook c5 is probably black's best, and that tries to lure white into taking here and getting this sort of position, but this at least gives black chances. I'm not sure, but it's at least chances. But actually white can be a lot more clever about it, and it's a common theme in these positions. White can leave black with the 2 pawns on the queen side, which looks great, but actually these endings abound with theoretical draws. For example, rook a7, rook c2, rook b7, rook a5, king d5, this sort of position here is actually a book draw. For example, b4, king e6, a5, king f6, turn and mate, king e6, king d6, check, there. And this is actually a book draw. It seems unbelievable, but if you play around with this sort of configuration, you'll see that actually there's no way that black can move forward the 2 pawns without losing one of them, and then it's an easy draw. And in the meantime, black is always stymied by the fact that his king can't actually play in the game. Now, that's just one example. I have pages and pages of this rubbish, which I'm not going to bore you with, but it's suffice to say it looks like white has more chances of drawing this ending, this one here, than black has of winning it. More chance of drawing it than black has of winning it. But rook c5, suggested by Clement, is definitely the way to go. Instead, I played the straightforward rook h3. I say straightforward, but of course that allows white to play rook g5, and now black has to effectively give up a pawn in order to win the h and g pawns, and there are no realistic winning chances anymore. Of course, that's no reason to agree a draw, so played on a bit, h6, Rook takes h5. I could have tried to keep the queen side pawns intact, something like this, but this doesn't really work either, because white can play moves like c4. For example, rook h4 check, rook takes c4, rook g6, a3, h6, now threatening h7 check, rook c8, rook a6, b4, king d2, and this is just a positional draw. Once again, it's one of these things where both sides have an impressive majority and a wing, but there's actually no way of making these majorities do anything. I played rook takes h5 and king to h7. But now it's quite clear, and it was very clear to my opponent, of course. You could see how relaxed he was about the position, that there's no winning chances whatsoever. I took this. I briefly considered playing rook e2, but I knew that he would find rook e5, which then gets his king into the box of the black pawn. I played one more move, h5, and offered a draw. Oh well, what can you say about this game? First point was that the opening went extremely well. It was quite a good advert for black's chances in the system. Secondly, that at the end of the day, my pragmatic approach of playing quite quickly worked quite well in terms of having time at the appropriate junctures when my opponent didn't have it. Third thing was that once again the folly of playing quickly in your opponent's time trouble when you've got a better or winning position, because what actually happened was it took me from having a better position to a lost position for no real reason, because I had plenty of time to check and double check that he didn't have anything nasty. And in fact, as you saw in the game, his rook d8 check, the nastiness that I had missed, actually should have won the game for him. But the saving grace for me was the fact that he was in such terrible time trouble. And I suppose the final thing that this game showed was how really accurate you have to be in order to maximise your winning chances against these sort of players. I had one realistic way of playing that ending better. Not clear that it would have won, but it would have given me stronger winning chances. I fluffed that and didn't get near winning the game. These 2600 guys are very, very hard to beat indeed. Actually, in the last 3 European Team Championships, I've had 3 winning or close to 1 positions against 2600 players. 2007 against Mr. Bartel, 2608. 2009 against Mr. Ivanisevic, 2614. And now against Mr. Saric, 2648. And all of these games were draws because I was not sufficiently accurate when the chance presented itself to me. Guys are very tricky. On the other hand, it's great to get a chance to get a shot at them, which is why I love playing in that event. Okay, folks, I hope you enjoyed the game. I hope you were entertained by my blunders. We all make them. And the next game that I post to this will probably be a lot more lightweight. I'm thinking of presenting a recent 25 move win, which is not nearly as tricky as this game. Okay, well thank you very much folks, and